Okay, team, welcome. Restore Native webinar series number three, four, three. Anyway, we're here, Plant Like a Pro tonight. So we're going to be stepping through basically practical details on how to plant, sharing some of the tips that we've learned along the way, various different methods, and basically just going through making sure that when you're planting trees, you get the best result out there. So that's our plan for tonight. We've got Annette in the background pushing out the details. She's shuffling the slides and doing all the magic, and I'm just standing here looking silly. So I'd love a bit of interaction. It's quite hard on these webinars because I can't see you guys. I can only see me and the slides. So if you can't see me properly or something's not working or whatever, just shout out. And in the Q&A box there, as your questions come up along the way, down the bottom or wherever it is on your, depending on what you're on. Oh, Philip from Otaki, what a legend! I like that. G'day. Yeah, on the Q&A function down the bottom, just chuck in any questions as we go. So I'll be talking about quite a few things, and if you sort of go, oh, okay, Adam, but what about this? Then that'll come up on my screen, and we'll be able to sort of cover off questions as we go. And then as we get to the end, we'll go through and cover off any questions we haven't at the end. So just fire them through. So that we're here to help share a bit of what we've learned along the way, and hopefully get success for everyone out there planting trees, really. So who am I? If you haven't met me before, I'm Adam. I started Restore Native 5 or 6 years ago now. I grew up on a farm, born in the Waikato. We're actually born up north, raised in the Waikato. I own a farm here at Cambridge, where we run the nursery from. So I'm a beef farmer. Really involved in lots of conservation projects. We're actually launching our own conservation project that Restore Natives is supporting, which is amazing. So look out for that over the next few months as things come together. And really, my goal is just getting out there and making it easy for farmers to plant native trees on their farm. Farmers, landowners, lifestyle blockers, whoever it is, we just want to break down the barriers, whether that's costs, availability of plants, knowledge like we're sharing tonight, or any of the services that we offer from, spraying, supplying plants, planting, and maintenance as well. So who are we? Cool. So this is our nursery. This is our team. These are our full timers. We're an eclectic bunch. I think everyone on our team is a career changer one way or another, from a lot of them coming out of offices and inside jobs and wanting to be more connected with nature. So yeah, we've got an absolute lovely bunch of people, and it's such a big part of why we love coming to work. So yeah, we're based in Cambridge, or just out of Cambridge. We grow 1 million plants a year at our nursery, and we turn those over. 80% of those go out the door every year, and we grow on some more for the next year. So we grow varying ages and stages varieties, but primarily those first generation colonizing plants. We grow around 20 odd species, a lot of the standard things that you know out there, a few random bits and pieces for fun too. And we try and offer something for everyone. We grow larger grade plants for people wanting immediate impact, and we grow smaller grade plants for people on a budget just trying to make their dollar go a long way and get as much native sort of bush out there as possible. We deliver across the North Island, and then we offer like a full service across the Waikato Bay of Plenty. So yeah, on-site planning, drone mapping, spraying of woody weeds and whatnot, a planting service, and we also do release spraying and ongoing maintenance. So yeah, very cool team. A big part of why I love coming to work, and yeah, we have a lot of fun while we do it. So the Restore Native vision. Very simple, like I said before, unproductive farmland, going back to diverse native forests and providing biodiversity on farm. Really, really simple in that sense. We want productive farming, and that's the last point I make there. We really want to strike that good balance between good productive use of farmland, people in their houses on their lifestyle blocks, but those areas that shouldn't be farmed or are sort of waste areas, we want to see them given back to nature, and we want to break down the barriers to do it. So really, that is why we're here sharing this sort of stuff tonight. We want to share the vision out there. We want to offer a good quality plant for a reasonable price, and we want to break down all those barriers that people might have, whether it's labour, knowledge base, whatever it might be, on basically having successful native restoration. So we'll get into tonight. What is the plan? So we've basically got three things that we're going to cover off, three main topics. So selecting the best grade of plant. So that's a really, it depends on the project. We'll talk through that. Best practice planting techniques. So that's both with an auger or a spade, looking at the key things to watch out for. That's going to be awesome because I'm really looking forward to some feedback on that because a lot of people are going, why do you do this, Adam? Or, mate, you're stupid. Why this? You can do this way better. And that's been the evolution of our process over 5 or 6 years too. We're always trying to make it better. And the third is sort of distributing your plants to create a natural forest. One of the biggest mistakes I see is things like putting a swamp flax on the side of a hill. They don't live there and it doesn't look natural. So we kind of find ways that, hey, swamp flaxes live in swamps and, drier things tend to migrate more onto these hills and really wet stuff. So we talk through that and basically show a few images and how it sort of looks in reality. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So just hit that Q&A button and just fire those questions through. As I said, and it'll be checking those as we go through. But yeah, you can sort of either jump in the chat or hit the Q&A button and just sort of fire your questions through as you go. So, okay, we'll get into it. Selecting the best size of plant. So this image here, all three of those plants are Carnuka, and they're simply growing into different sizes. So it's a really good visual representation of the three different sizes we grow. The big one on the left hand side, that's a 1 litre. So we call that a large grade or a premium grade, depending on the plant that's in it. But basically, that's the largest one that we grow in volume. We grow those plants to around 750 to a metre high. We do keep them trimmed to a certain level because you've got to balance that sort of root size to tree size. No point growing a really big tree in a tiny little pot because it just falls over when it goes in, gets transplant shock, gets blown around, and it doesn't work. So the middle one is our standard grade. Probably 80% of our plants are sold out the door in that size. And they're the main revegetation grade size that's used in plantings in most places over the North Island. So yeah, they're a really good hearty. If you plant them well, look after them well, they tend to be the lowest cost way of achieving a forest canopy. So that's why they've become popular. Now the 40 cell that we have there, and we call it the medium grade. It's a pretty cost-effective way to establish things. That Carnuka there, and that 40 cell grade, we plant a lot of those in sort of hill country, where we're doing sort of, hectares and hectares of planting. It makes it cost effective to cover a lot of area, basically. And with that tree there, like it'll still grow reasonably quickly. You won't notice a huge amount of difference between that tree and the next one up after 12 months on the same site. If looked after well, there'll be a little bit of a difference. But, in 5, 10 years, once they're sort of reaching toward maturity, you're not going to notice a huge difference from there. So there's a right tree for everyone, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you sort of discern that in the next slide. So this is the best way of sort of establishing is how big is that pot size? Because at the end of the day, the roots are the engine that drives the growth behind these trees. So selecting what's right for you comes down to, often to budget, but also to your site. So that large is a 1 litre pot. Commonly, like a PB2 is basically the equivalent of that. Our standard grade, the T28, is 500 mils. The medium size T40 is 250 mils. And then we don't grow a forestry grade, which is technically called a forestry grade, in a 64 by 64 tray, or they're the ones that tend to go bare rooted out to forestry plantings, or in a 50 cell, for example. So you can see the step up in root sizes, and you can grow that tree as tall as you want, but at the end of the day, it's only going to grow as well as the horsepower underneath it. So that's why we offer these different sizes, because they apply for different sites. If you're willing to spend a bit of money, put a larger tree in, the large grade actually offers a lot of value. But if you want the medium cost effective option, that standard grade, good prep, good maintenance, is going to look after you really well. And if you're on a low budget, that 40 cell goes well. If you're on a really low budget, you want to cover a lot of area and you'll accept slower growth and losses, the forestry grade does have a place. But we found for the type of work we're doing, mainly on farms, sort of up to 10 hectare type plantings, they're not a particularly great option for what we do. We haven't had that much success with them. So we try and keep away from them. I've just got a question there. What is the difference between the age difference? That's a really good question from that person there who came through and asked, what is the age difference of those three trees? They're actually all the same age. Those are all about a year old, 15 months old in that picture. So their growth is pretty well dictated by their root size. They've all filled out their right bottom of their roots. We do the 40 cell a little bit later than the others. But yeah, literally the growth size difference there is due to how much nutrient and how much soil they've got access to. So they're not actually necessarily older, but it's just how much they've grown in that soil. There is for some slower growing species, they might spend 3 years graduating up through these sizes. They might go 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, but things like Kanuka that grow so fast, they wind up basically growing in that one grade from there. So no, that's a great question. Thank you. Okay, I've got one more question there, and then we might just go through the next. I'll just have a read of this. Bear with me. Brewery. Oh, thank you. Pronounced like brewery without a B. That's the question. I love that. Thank you. I appreciate it. Cool. Okay, we'll go on to the next. Okay, best practice planting tips. So we had a bit of fun shooting these photos out here. This is me on an auger and spade, which I have to admit I don't do bloody nearly enough of this winter. I've been stuck in the office a bit too much. But really, look, we are planting technique agnostic. We do not care whether you're planting with a spade or an auger. You can achieve a really good result with both. And that's really why we're here tonight to talk about the pros and cons of each and basically how to follow best practice if you're using each. So I think it's a really important thing. Some people say, no, you can't use augers in these situations, or don't use spades for this. To be honest, it suits the person, the type of plant you're planting. So yeah, let's look through that. Spades, uh, everyone's got a spade, right? So if you come and grab some trees, you can go and grab a spade out of the shed and go and plant it. So it's a major example why that's a good option. Um, Now, if you're planting smaller grade plants, we actually find that planting with a spade is a lot faster. There's also some gains to be made in certain sort of operations where you've got planter bags and trees are easily sort of, collated up and you can run with a spade. Um, Now, the auger, we find it generally is faster. You can really pop those holes out pretty quickly. And if you've got an efficient planting crew behind you, you can actually really rip through that as well. We've actually had better results in side-by-side trials that we ran in terms of the auger actually loosening a lot of soil and providing, a lot of sort of quick root growth in those roots to basically come into a looser soil next to them rather than a hard packed soil down on top of them, and therefore that minimized transplant shock. So we'll admit, basically now what do we do? We mainly plant with augers, and there are other reasons for that. So we like having a diverse crew. You saw a picture of our team. We're not all big burly people with a planter spade and a planter bag just smacking trees in the ground. We've got big people and little people and men and women and everyone's got their strengths. Simple folk like me jump on an auger and just auger holes all day and I absolutely love it. And then we've got the finesse, which in our team generally is the woman, coming through, planting a tree well, standing it up straight, making sure it's taking a bit more care with it and going in. So you're not sort of slapping trees around and breaking things and being silly like some of the big burly guys can do. They just get off on the augers. So that really helps diversity in our team. And there are a few practical reasons in terms of the way we run our teams as well that mean that planting the augers better. And we believe you do get a slightly better growth result for those reasons that I mentioned. But for some people, that might be negligible, and on some sites there isn't. So let's look at the actual how-to. So this is auger technique. So in option one there, we're actually measuring the height of the root ball of the plant. So it's important that that you know how deep you need to drill. For some people, they'll dazzle a spray mark on the auger so they know their height. For us who are doing it all the time, we get used to the sort of depth that you need to go down. But it's important that you know how deep you need to go. One of the common mistakes is just not planting your tree at the right depth. Too shallow, your roots exposed at the top, the tree's going to flop over, and you're just not going to get very good results with it. Too deep, there's a little bit more leniency on that, but if you do get it too deep, certain species with soft trunks can actually rot away against their trunk if you go too deep with it. So there is a balance, but we'll cover that in a little bit later. Now, selecting the correct auger size, that's really important. So with our T28 half litre example shown in that picture, it's about 65 mil on top. And then we use a 90 mil auger basically. So a 90 mil auger opens up plenty of soil out of that, loosens it all around the tree. When it goes in, we fill that soil back in, and then it's got that loose around it. So it's a really good option. Now you see in option three here how deep we've drilled that. Now I'm not sure if you can see, but the tree's about 155, 160 mil. We've drilled down to about 200 mil. And that means that when we go to plant that tree, we knock a little bit of soil back into the hole, and then we put the tree in on top of it. So the reason why we do that, it means that the roots that are coming out the bottom, those aggressive growing roots, are immediately going into much more friable soil, and they're going to grow a little bit better from there. So that's just a simple trick there, going a little bit deeper. And it also means that if you drop a fertilizer tab in there, if you're using those, then they're not going to be immediately touching the roots and burning them as well. So you can use that as an option, but we find just going a little bit deeper really helps. When you drop the plant in the hole, it should be, and we generally say a finger of soil above where the root ball stops. And that means that you're not going to expose any root to the soil. And the dirt that is on top of the plant, basically a finger on top is the ideal amount that's in there deep. In some sandy soils with certain trees, they need to go a little bit deeper to stop them wobbling. And again, like I said before, with some very soft stems, you need to be careful not to cover them too much. But as a general rule of thumb, just making sure it's a little bit down. If you can see that potting mix out the top of that plant, it's probably not quite deep enough. You just need to have a little bit of covering over top of that to make sure it's in deep. So now you see there in image 5, it's my boot kicking the tree. It didn't do something to make me angry. It is just simply me healing the soil in hard around the plant. It's not enough just to shuffle it in, give it a little pat, and hope that it'll be okay. It's not a little pet kitten. We actually need to really just compact that soil in around that tree. So see that, shout out to Timber Saws and Levin. They've got great gear. Yeah, amazing spades, great planting bags as well. We use a lot of them. So no, yeah, bang on is a place to get that. We'll share that later actually. Anyway, putting that tree in. So yeah, compact it down nice and hard. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes we find when we're training new planters. They're just a little bit too gentle. And hey, yep, you don't want to be breaking that tree, but it's really important that it's just pushed in solidly. And you come over to number 6, that tree should be standing upright. You should be able to give it a tug, and it's not coming out of the hole. You should be able to pull on it reasonably firmly, and it's actually stuck there because it's got soil packed in around it. So if you don't pack that soil in around it, you get sort of cavities around the tree. We've pulled poorly planted trees out a month later that have died, and you see around the outside of them, they've had no soil to root contact, and basically those roots have rotted in there. They've created a basic composting zone with that air in it. So it's important that you actually pack that soil in well around them. And get them in nice and solid. So that's the auger technique. We'll obviously share this after the webinar, so you can actually have a look at that, use it for your own, and yeah, come to us with any questions you've got on it. We are we've tried a number of things, tons of different auger sizes. We've tried some pretty innovative options too on trying to get them to go a bit better. See a comment from someone there about they just don't go that well into rocky ground, and that's exactly right. You know, you'll see on this auger it's got a big stick out the side of it, and that's a clutch. So if it hits a tree root or a rock, it actually stops rather than sort of twisting your back. But still, when we're in really rocky ground, the spade's generally the best option. Yeah, and that's just fortunately in the Waikato we've got lots of nice sort of loamy soil that we can dig into. So anyway, on to the spade. Now, this one, I've seen 1,000 different techniques of people planting trees with a spade. So of those 1,000, probably 800 of them are right. So we are not the gospel and exactly do it our way or you're wrong. But there are a few key fundamentals here to get it right. So one of the biggest mistakes we see made with spades is not getting enough depth. It is much harder, when you're planting a tree that's it's got that 160 odd mil that you need to go down. Some of them are even deeper in terms of their root balls. Um, Sometimes you have to really get in there in hard soil to actually open up enough. If you're having to dig a whole hole, like dig a hole like you're burying something, um, then it's going to be really time consuming. So we do try to avoid that. It's not a very quick way to do it, but in some hard soils, it's just not an option other than to chip out either side and shovel the soil out and then shovel it back in. It's another reason why we tend to avoid larger grade plants when we're doing revegetation, because the time it takes to dig a large hole out is quite significant. And it just blows out the cost of that project. The labor cost is such a big part, obviously, for the planting. And that's where the auger comes into its own. It can drive a larger auger bit and actually pull quite a bit of soil out. But yeah, we're using it again, the 28 cell standard grade here. So it gives you an idea of the planting technique. So into the ground, nice and deep, nice and hard. If the soil is relatively friable, you can get that in, and you've got a good spade. And this is where someone mentioned live-in saw makers. It's a really good, they've got these really good commercial planting spades. So if you're going to be doing a few, spades aren't that expensive, and it's really good to have a proper spade. If you're using a light spade, I find the fencing spades are pretty good, but the planting spade with a bit of a V on tends to just get a little bit deeper in the ground and gives a good option. So into the ground, awesome. We then can either make a cross T in the ground, so in one way in another, or you make a T, so cross one way and then cross at the top of it, and then you basically fold that soil up. And then, as you can see, what I'm doing there in number three, we're basically holding back that soil that we folded up, dropping the plant into the hole. So again, making sure that that plant is buried so you just can't see the top of the soil on it. That being the number one mistake that people make again, especially with spade planting, because it's hard, like it's much physically harder, and you have to chip away at it sometimes to get that depth, is they don't plant them deep enough. Plant then tips over. It might even survive. But the problem is if it does survive leaning over, often the grass will grab it in the spring, drag it under, and that'll be the final death kiss for it. So really important that you've got enough depth that you can come to that final stage again of firming it in really well, pushing it down nice and tight, getting it standing up straight, and then that plant's going to survive. So yeah, it's not a rocket science, but there are just a few key things with both. Depth is probably the number one thing, and firming plants in is the other real important thing. So you need to get enough depth, enough size in your hole, get them in deep enough, firm the tops in really well so that tree doesn't pull out, and then you know that the soil is compacted around it, the roots will grow, and your tree's set up for success. So that is our guide to planting with a spade or an auger. Very happy. Fire questions at me. Tell me that's silly and something else that I've forgotten. We're always happy to share. But yeah, really important, just really basic techniques. And again, like I say, we'll share these out with everyone after the webinar. So you've got a little handy guide if you're going to be out there planting trees and what you need to know. So just have another quick drink and then we'll go on. Oh, forgive me. So yeah, not enough depth, not loosening the soil, not firming down. Really clear things. And the other thing you find with an auger is clearing the vegetation, because if your auger gets clogged up, it becomes a lot harder to use. You become a lot slower. So yeah, we really recommend keeping your auger clean. So that actually requires clearing a bit of vegetation when you go to plant. So it helps to have grazed a paddock before you're planting, or to have done a spot spray. And yeah, that really helps to make your augering process a whole lot easier. So and again, don't get into that situation where you're using the wrong sized auger. It's too small, and there's not enough space for the tree to go in and have a little bit of sort of friable soil around it. Steve, where do you put the fertilizer tabs when planting with a spade? Yeah, bang on, Steve. Not quite the same option to actually remove them from the side of the plant in the same way. It depends a little bit on the fert tab you're using, how whether that's actually an issue with burning the roots down. Some of the pressed fertilizer tabs, the quite cheap ones, they can be pretty variable, and putting them next to the roots can cause a little bit of damage. But the better quality ones, it's not such an issue if they do. So in that situation where you're opening up that tee, opening it right up, lifting it back, you can just drop that fertilizer tab in. If in an ideal situation you've gone a little bit deeper than you need to, you can just shuffle a little bit of soil over that before you drop your plant in. So, yeah, again, probably depends on the fertilizer tab you're using. Look, it's not going to kill the tree, but we're talking about best practice. Would have it not touching the roots directly, but again, depending on the fertilizer tab, because some of them are actually quite good. So that's the planting piece. That's the practical bit. Now, when this how to achieve a native forest, a natural native forest look is all about when you get those plants home, you got a ute load of plants, and you've got a paddock, a riparian area, or a hillside, whatever it is that you're going to plant. How are you going to distribute them? Um, and that's the really important thing. So the obvious example, and if those of you who attended my last webinar, that picture at the top there is a big galley that we planted at Mangatotiri. And what that is, drier loving species more exposed towards the top, medium down through the middle, and then wet species through the middle. And it's creating a natural forest habitat. So it's plants growing where they want to grow. There's no point I talked about swamp flexes on the side of a hill. They'll grow and they'll look okay for 5 years or so, and then they start falling apart and looking a bit raggedy, because they're just not meant to be there. They need to be in heavy soils, to do well. And again, those dry loving species, the Carnuka and stuff, you won't see Carnuka in a swamp. Manuka lives in a swamp, so you've got to balance the trees in the right place. And getting those, on the edges of your forest, the trees that can deal with a bit of exposure, but then putting your other ones into the ones that can't deal with exposure in under a bit of shade, or into that sort of enrichment planting space where they're actually going to be in underneath something. So what we're going to do in the next slide is go through and talk about basically every species we grow and where to put it. So Annette has done this illustration. There's a few out there that do similar, but what we're basically talking about is we're imagining that we're planting on any given farm. There's a creek, river, swamp, waterway. There's open water in the middle. We've then broken down into 4 different zones. So you've got your immediately adjacent the water zone, the area that gets flooded as the water comes up. You've then got your sort of swampy areas. So depending on where you live, that swampy area might be running for 100 meters away from that river. Or, sometimes it's only a few meters up into that next zone, which is sort of the heavier, low-lying soils. And then into zone 4, we're out into those sort of dry hillsides. So we're basically just going to talk through the plants over here. And as we talk through them, fire any questions you like at me. So Akiakis, this is quite a common one, in sort of, colonizing, revegetation, planting, especially around the Waikato. It's a really cool plant for giving a bit of immediate growth and color. It doesn't provide any bird food. It's not going to live forever. But it's good to sort of establish that cover to help those other really important trees come up. So Akiaki tends drier. It can go okay into swampy areas, but generally, it won't thrive there. It wants to be medium to dry, and that's its home. So, whereas the old cabbage tree, very reliable, we still see them hanging on hillsides, things that have survived burning of bush and clearing of land. But we also see them in and around swamps. They won't survive planted directly into water or areas that are completely waterlogged. It's very hard to establish them there. The odd one might hang on, but they're not particularly robust in that space. But in that swampy area, really good, right through everything else from there. So now we're into our Carex species. So Geminata very much in the wet areas, and we still see it out there in a lot of drains and creeks. Geminata is like a wide-leafed cutty grass, people will often call it. A real good natural solution for holding those sort of stream banks together, and often in those flood zones as well, which is really cool. Carrick sector and Vergata. They are very similar. Some people, yeah, some people tried struggle to discern them, but they're amazing plants. And we've actually done a big project with a lot of owners out in the Hauraki Plains this year, where they've been cleaning out drains, and we've been planting just Carrick's grasses along the side. So they only grow to about a metre tall. But what they do is that they hold that sort of stream bank together. And they're all also really like big nitrogen and phosphorus feeders. So any of that overland flow from paddocks, if there's a little bit of a flood or it's on a bit of a slope, the carrots will pick up that nitrogen and it'll grow with it rather than letting it into the waterway. So it's stopping the crumbling and it's stopping the nutrient coming in, which is pretty magic. So they're really good options. And Cypress estellatus, a similar one, just probably the next row behind those carrots grasses. It's somewhere between a carrots grass and a flax. It's got a wide leaf. It grows a bit taller, but again, it's sucking nutrient out and it's holding those banks together. I got a question here. Would you plant cabbage trees in areas where they'll get wet feet or swampy areas? Yep, no, very happy to put them where they'll get wet feet or swampy areas. That's not a problem. Just not into water itself. Like we sort of go, oh yeah, it's waterlogged. Cabbage trees don't establish that well where it's waterlogged. But if it's an area that might be really wet and boggy for 6 months of the year, a cabbage tree will survive there just fine. So it's sort of it's a combination of yeah, they're in that fringe is where they start to thrive. And although we see them sometimes right in really wet areas and wetlands, it may not have been really wet when they started out. So that's the trade-off there with the cabbage tree. Now, the harakeke or the swamp flax. This is sort of such a magical plant, but quite maligned, especially in our team. We kind of you drive around and you see flaxes planted on waterways. A real common thing, and it must have been all the rage in the 90s, is to plant your swamp flaxes right on your creek, narrow one wire fence there for your cows, and the flax is growing into the fence, shorting it out the whole time. And then on the other side, once it floods, the water undermines that flax and they'll snap off. And this is what they do after about 10 or 15 years is they snap in half. And then that clogs the waterway or that gets taken downstream in a flood and it blows out a culvert. So yeah, it's a common thing we see on farms that yeah, flaxes just aren't meant to be next to running water. They're a wetland plant. So really, we talk about them, living in areas 2 and 3. They don't want to be right on the water and they don't want to be on the hills. So it's probably one of my biggest take homes from tonight is just do not go and plant flaxes next to your streams. Yeah, they need to be back. They need to be back a couple of meters from that water's edge. And that's amazing place to put them. They're beautiful plants. They flower like crazy. It's not just the birds, the bees get into them. They got heaps of pollen. But yeah, on the waterways, they might just look great for 5 or 10 years, and then they'll start causing you trouble. So next one up's a Hebe. So Hebe strictors, generally they lean drier. So we say 3 and 4, they'll go okay in zone 3, no trouble. Zone 4, they love the dry. You'll often see them on clay banks growing on roadsides, and they're hardy as anything. But they're a drier leaning plant. Kānuka, much the same. We talk about Mānuka and Kānuka. You'll see Kānuka often dominant on most hills. Mānuka in damper areas generally. It's not an absolute rule because they both sort of they're both very prolific and they both get planted in a lot of different places. But Kānuka is your drier leaning plant. So, from medium to dry, and then Mānuka's down the other end. So on to the next page, we've got some more plants. Now, Kahikatea, another one a little bit like a cabbage tree, a little bit hard to establish in absolute waterlog, but they will, but at lower percentage success than they do if you're out in that next sort of swampy area. Swampy through medium, Kahikatea go well. But with that said, I've got Kahikatea on my hills here in Cambridge, but they are probably damper hillsides, south facing in places. Kahikatea still managed to get a bit of dominance in there. As we come around the drier faces, we've got Rewa and stuff. So Now, karamu, amazing fruiting coprosma, such a cool plant, really important to have bird food, aggressive as anything, can be a little bit fragile, they tip over, they don't live for a long time, but they create so many babies in that time. They're pretty versatile. They'll come from swampy areas right through the dry stuff. And they're, yeah, just a magical little plant. So next one's a Pittosporum tenifolium. Now, pittosporums are really versatile. Again, swampy right through dry. This, like the lemonwood below it, they're just a really good versatile plant that can go right through there. So, lacebark, very similar as well. Corfi, very similar, obviously for different reasons. Corfi, amazing sort of flowering plant, obviously a hard one to establish in riparian and smaller grades. So we're actually going away from growing it in any of our smaller grades, and we're growing into larger and larger grades to get it to survive. It's a really special tree, but really hard to establish. So yeah, we're bringing it into that next phase because we don't. The last thing we want to do is see people planting them and not surviving. So you'll see them on like in natural forest their seeds drop, and obviously they're really hard seed. They get washed down rivers and then they establish in that riparian zone on the side of the rivers, which is cool. But you'll see them sort of high up on hillsides. They survive really well too. So yeah, they're a really good option there. So these all three, four of these plants here going all the way through those different areas. Lacebark, lemonwood, they're prime examples of things which establish cover really well, which is awesome. Yeah, Mahoe. Mahoe's a fascinating tree, actually. In areas on sort of hill country like our farm that haven't been super intensely grazed, you still get Mahoe hanging on in the bottoms of these big gullies. So they do well in that sort of, swampy through to heavy soil. They're not natural higher up, but as sort of shade and shelter comes into forest a bit more, they can actually survive a little bit further. But if you're planting them, it's generally in that sort of swampy through to sort of heavy soils. Now, Manuka, probably our most versatile tree, hands down. It can, I've seen Manuka growing in a foot of water, and we see it growing in the boniest of clay hillsides. So, as a shrub, you don't want it right alongside your waterway because, it's a flooding risk and all the rest of it, but it is just incredibly versatile, hard to kill, creates cover, does well in that sense. So. Now, mountain flax. Always take the time to talk about the differences between these two flaxes. It's not everyone knows it, but basically, fundamentally, New Zealand has two flaxes. We have a swamp flax, upright leaves, upright flowers, and then we have a mountain flax, which are leaves that droop off at the end and they go out on a 45. So mountain flax, natural zone, up on the side of hills. You'll see them established on cliff faces. You see them on the side of Mount Pirongia, places like this. So they're an awesome plant. They only grow to sort of 1.2 to 1.5 meters as a clump, whereas the Harakeke swamp flax is sort of 2.5 meters, real big plant. So they're a really versatile option. We actually, lots of farmers use them in landscaping, around their houses on farms or around effluent ponds or cattle yards and that sort of stuff. And because they're hardy, but they don't grow too big and cause too many problems. So, but they are a drier leaning species. Yeah, on to the last one. So we got a few things here, like oi oi, and we've actually got a number of other swamp sedges and rushes and things. So yeah, alongside the calyxes, these are all things that sit in those wetlands, act as filtration for sediment and nutrient, and are a really good option. You actually see oi oi a lot used in sort of like stormwater collection and streetscapes in residential areas because it's really like hardy and again sucks up a bit of nutrients. So. Railway. Now, this is quite a common one in the Waikato and a lot of bush remnants. It's a really cool plant. It's a bit frost sensitive. It leans dry, doesn't like the wet, won't outcompete things in the wet. Ribbonwood, super versatile, a little bit like lacebark, really. One of the things I love about ribbonwood is its real cylindrical shape. So when we're talking about what to plant where, if you're planting a riparian strip, and you've got a meter or 2 meters off your drain, ribbonwood is one of the things you just need to have in your mix. You don't want to have these big wide growing trees. It's sort of ribbonwood, cabbage trees, kahikateas, pretty much in a narrow riparian strip, that's what you need. And then ideally, if you're a little bit wider, then you can put some swamp flexes in and some toys and stuff. But yeah, ribbonwood are just this amazing tall cylindrical growth, really quick growers too. So now tea talkie again. heavy soils right through to the slightly drier, beautiful fruiting, long-lived tree. Really good option in that sense. Toi toi. Now, toi toi is another one. Differences between Toi Toi and Pampas. There is a way you can tell just by looking at their leaves. But primarily you'll see Toi Toi flowers more like toward Christmas, and Pampas is sort of a late summer, early autumn flower. Toi Toi again, a little bit like a swamp flax, they're a bit more out the side. Pampas really straight up flowers. So Pampas just spreads like wildfire, an absolute weed, mongrel of a thing, really hard to control once it gets established too. Whereas Toi Toi is a pretty amazing little swamp plant that actually does a really cool job of, being that medium grade above the grasses. So a good option to have sort of in those sort of wetter areas. So, swampy areas through to hard, so the heavy soils, and just a real complement to a swamp. So now totara is a very versatile, very, very versatile tree. If you follow our socials, we just put a bit of a video out today on Instagram and Facebook talking about totara. It will grow pretty much anywhere. You don't want to put it again right by the water, but it will grow in swamps and it will grow on the driest, boniest hillsides. It's a really special tree because it lives for a very long time. It fruits, and this is really important. It fruits in late summer, so it's a real important food provider, but it gets the birds doing the cycle of carting seeds around. So, a really important plant in the sense that it sort of lives a long time and feeds the birds, which I really, really love. So, um, cool. Tree lucerne. Now, we've put tree lucerne there. It's not a native, but it is one we grow that we get quite a bit of demand for. So, it doesn't love wet feet, the tree lucerne, but will grow anywhere through medium soils up through the dry hills. A really good just bit of winter food for things like keridu and for bees as well. It flowers, sort of, it'll be flowering in the end of this month, which is really, really cool. It's a time of year when there isn't a lot of other things around. So that's why it complements our native trees and that's why we use it. It's not a long-lived plant. 5 or 10 years is all you're going to get out of it. But in that time, it'll add a lot of value, and then the other stuff will cover in around it from there. So, wineberry. So that's our final one on our list of what we grow. There are tons of other plants, and we can plug these into this matrix. And if you've got questions on other species, just let us know. But wineberry tends to go swampy through to heavy soils. And it's a little bit frost tender, so we've got to be a little bit careful where we put wineberry. Likes a bit of shade, really important tree to have. But yeah, generally it's not super dry areas, but again, not on that water's edge. But a versatile plant nonetheless, again, fruiting. So yeah, this is our mix of trees. And like I say, we do grow another sort of 5 or 10 varieties that we don't do in large commercial quantities. And we do a bunch of other trees that we do bits and pieces of for people that we source from partner nurseries as well as a part of our mixes. But these are sort of the common ones that get planted, and that's why we thought giving a bit of a resource out here that people can use this as a bit of a resource when planning their area, or when just getting those trees home and knowing how to lay them out and plant them in the right place. So I just had a bit of a question there. Erosion-prone hillsides, Manuka, Kānuka, and Totara, but does Totara get too big? No, that there is basically the dream combo for erosion-prone hillsides. Totara being the fact that it gets big, it's not a really tall tree, but it does grow. It's not a forest giant the way that it sort of shelters out and shades out a lot of other things like a rimu or a kahikatea will. But it's a really strong tree, strong root system. They're really strong wood. They don't tend to fall over and have those sort of issues. And it's a bird feeder, so it helps with that succession long term. So our dream combo, to answer your question for doing erosion-prone hillsides, and we've just been doing a heap of work down the King Country lately, is putting in Manuka and Kānuka in our medium grade with Totara in our large grade, because it grows a little bit slower. And it's a good mix that gives hardy things to establish on those hillsides, but something that lives for a long time that'll bring the birds. And the birds coming and bringing that seed is just a really important part of how we're actually going to make those sort of forever forests at the end of the day. So cool. So that's pretty much the end of where we are today, isn't it? Yes, no, that's wonderful. So yeah, if you've got any other questions, I really appreciate those who've answered them along the way. Hang about and fire them through now, and I can answer them as we go. But otherwise, thanks for checking in. This is sort of a very quick run through of how these how planting goes and how to sort of have a simple impact on what you're doing, and hopefully these tips help. We've practiced them over a number of years now, and obviously we study a lot on terms of what works best and what works where, and we're sort of evaluating that all the time. It's not just in your region, but in your specific area. If you're frost prone or you tend to get a certain type of weather pattern, certain things are going to do better or worse for you. So again, general advice. I'm always happy to help with more specific advice. If you got a planting project you want me to come and have a look at, I'm more than happy to give on-farm advice, mapping, species lists, and that sort of stuff. If you're looking to do a bit and you just want to go, gee, Adam, what do I plant there? Send me a photo. Just send it to my email, Adam@Restore Native. Always happy to help. So anyway, I've got a few other questions coming through. Would you plant anything else to diversify on the hillside? Um, Totally. The thing about planting, erosion-prone hills is it depends how much money you've got and how quickly you want to get a result. We're planting sort of Manuka, Kānuka, Tōtara. We're getting that in the ground for sort of at 2.5 meter spacings for about 7.5 grand a hectare. If you went to 2 meter spacing, it's more like sort of 10 or $11,000 a hectare. And it really just, yeah, it depends what you want to put in. You could sort of keep adding species in there. You could get your hebes in, you could get your, come back and start enriching that with Titoki and Rewa Rewa and start putting all these other varieties, Pittosporums, but you're just going to be adding cost and cost and cost. If you've got the money, absolutely do it. But those three that we talked about are sort of the guarantee hardy options. So next question. How do we work out plant spacing, creating a mix of tortoise, mountain flax, cabbage, etc.? Yeah, that's really cool. That's really good chat. So we've got to consider what we're planting, and how big it's going to grow. So we've got a plant list on our website, or if you email, we can email you a copy, and it's got sort of the sizing of each tree, and it's sort of how big it's going to grow. So knowing that your cabbage tree is only ever going to get sort of yay wide, and it's only ever going to cover that much when it goes big, you can't sort of plant your cabbage trees 2.5 meters apart because everything in between is never gonna fill in. When we're doing like say a grouping of mountain flax, they grow to about 1.2 meters on average. So we plant them about a meter apart, ensure a little bit of crossover, and then you've got nothing under them. Tortoise is a similar size, so that's sort of way of doing that. So if you're planting through like a swamp area, and you're putting cabbage trees, tortoise, swamp flaxes, some carex grasses, you just make sure they're mixed through the area that you're going to cover the space and not putting those small ones together. Where we planted the carexes along drains and whatnot, they're only growing to about a meter, so we put them in at about 800 mil centers. It means they're going to touch each other, so you're not dealing with weeds and stuff in between them. So it's sort of just being sensible about how big those things are going to grow and therefore how you sort of space them. You don't put sort of a ton of Kakatea or Titoki together because they're going to get really big. In the mix, you put your Kakatea 5 or 10 meters apart, and then you're putting all your sort of shorter lived species in between them, knowing that those Kakatea are eventually going to grow up and touch each other, but the flaxes aren't going to grow as big and whatnot. So it's about using those mature sizes and a bit of logical from there. So, thank you for the webinar. No worries. That's an easy question to ask anytime. How do you plan layout of plants? Yeah, cool. So, yep, a bit of what we said earlier, and sort of, yeah, we actually spot spray in a straight line because it makes it easier when you come back to do your maintenance. Not every tree grows different, different sizes, different heights, different speeds. So if you plant your trees in a straight line, you'll never know they were planted in a straight line. After 5 years down the track, they're all different sizes. It won't look like a grid. So yeah, the reason why you do that is that if you're releasing, you can walk down a line. If you're going along your cattle ruts along the side of the hill, plant in that cattle rut would be the most fertility. And you just follow that along, jump down to the next one and space it along from there. So yeah, depending on the spacing you're using, you're just going to use that as you go. But yeah, straight line's totally fine. Don't get too random about it. yeah, they work just fine. Where you're on a bit of a swamp area, you can sort of vary it up a little bit, and we do. But in those big areas, often straight lines. Do we put sleeves on everything? We actually, I think, I don't think we've used a plant sleeve this year. Plant sleeves are mainly protection rabbits and pukikos. We have had a pukiko issue in the past and used plant sleeves on that. Excuse me. Um, and that's been our major issue. Rabbits don't tend to be a major problem in a lot of our planting. You go down south, and rabbits are a massive problem, and they're sleeving absolutely everything because rabbits will chew them to bits. So they have a place, but yeah, it just depends on the pests that are present and the species you're putting in as to what they'll attack. So yeah, it's a good question, and it's a bit of a horses for courses on that. Weed matting, we try to avoid it. There's a few things there. Fundamentally, I hate the plastic stuff. Um, we have used a wool weed matting in the past. It works. It adds a bit of labour, so it costs a bit more. And then you get it doesn't take long with those biodegradable ones for them to actually start attracting soil and seed as they start to break down, and you start to get weeds up through them anyway. So it's kind of yeah. If you're landscaping, weed matting, sure, maybe. But for wider scale planting, yeah, we tend not to. Occasionally in like an erosion prone swale or something, we use weed matting, but otherwise not. Um, yeah, that's sort of the answer on that one. Best way to control grass around new plants. Cool. That's a great question, and actually something I'm real fired up on. And we're trying to do a lot of work on finding better ways to do it. Um, the number one best way is to pre-spray your spot. Um, if you just graze it down hard and you put a tree in, that grass is already halfway to sort of coming up and covering your tree. So a pre-spray is really important. We actually use a long-acting herbicide called Turb, a product called Timberwolf or Tag, or you can sort of buy these sorts of things. And that actually stops the grass, like new seeds from germinating around that in that spot as well. So we use glyphosate and turb together, and that holds your spot dead for a lot longer into the spring. So you've got a wider window to do your release spraying. So we actually just do our release spray with glyphosate. If you are only spraying, if you're only planting sort of hard stem species, there are some things like haloxyflop that you can spray over top of them. But it doesn't kill broadleaf weeds. So it depends what the weeds on your particular site are. But generally, using a good spot with a long-acting herbicide keeps things dead for a long time, and that gives you a wider window in the spring to get your release spray done with glyphosate. You don't have to get every leaf of grass around that tree if you can kill 80% of it. Because if you try and get every leaf, you wind up spraying the tree, and that's where damage and killing trees comes from. But yeah, nothing wrong with using glyphosate to spray around trees. It's not residual in the soil, so it won't kill anything, but just steer clear of brush killers. And yeah, there's no golden solution that works for everything, but there are some chemicals you can spray over some plants, but in a mix, you're going to have varying plants, varying needs. So not one magical chemical to rule them all, unfortunately. Do I have a recommendation for fertilizer for using in the hole? Yeah, Osmocote slow release fert tabs. They are actually granulized and they're held together they're sort of glued together basically, because they can guarantee that they're breaking down over a period of time. The old grey pressed fertilizer tabs, super variable. They can dump their nutrient in a couple of months, or they can still be hanging around a year later. But yeah, Osmocote fertilizer tabs. If you buy them in bulk, they're about 25 cents each or something. They have a value where you want to really kickstart things out of the ground or you're in low fertility. We don't use a lot of them because native trees don't soak up nutrient huge amounts. So where the grass is doing that, but a lot of the shrubs and that don't. They'll grow a little bit better, but they're not going to grow stupidly better. So there is a place for them. And I stood there on a site yesterday and I went, we probably should have used fert tabs in these because they're quite visible as you drive into this property, and they're a year old and they haven't grown heaps. Okay, so lesson learned. So that's a place to use them. But maintenance is more important than fertilizer, in my opinion. Yeah, and each side is different. There's a general rule of thumb ratio of different species. Yeah, totally. So when we're doing hill country, we would sort of put in 20% of the mix, totara, maybe a few other fruiting species, karamu. That's with the odd pittosporum, perhaps. Being hill country, of the 80% that's left, two-thirds of that might be kānuka and one-third of that mānuka. That's kind of our mix for like hill country. And I'm answering that because you mentioned hill country before. For other sites, it's really about getting a balance of the things that grow hardy and fast, like mānuka, akiaki, pittosporum, those sorts of things. They're creating cover. And then you think of the things that are providing food. So cabbage tree, karamu, mahoe, wineberry that are fruiting. So you need to get a reasonable smattering of them through, probably a little less than the hardy things. And then long-lived species, kakatea, totara, titoki, rewa. Ideally, you're getting 10% of your mix out of those species. Ideally, they cost more. Sometimes they cost twice as much. But they're going to live forever. So having 10% of your mix being these things that live forever is amazing if you can afford to do it, or come back with those in a couple of years and poke them in. So that's a really good option as well. But yeah, a mix of hardy things that grow fast, a slightly lower percentage of fruiting things, but really important to have them for the birds, and then sort of, ideally 10% or so being things that'll live for a very long time is the plan. So. Cool. I think that's about it on the Q&A. Just double check that we've got no more there, but that's awesome. You guys have been magic. I really appreciate the questions and stuff through tonight, guys. Hopefully you've learnt something. And as I said, just flick me an email, adam@restorenative.co.nz. Follow us on socials to see a bit more. And yeah, we'll see you for our next webinar, which is likely to be mid-August. I'm just about to go and take a little bit of time off with the kids, so we'll be back to planning that, and we'll get that out in our newsletter and out on socials so you can catch up on that one. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Have a great night.